there, it's John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 5 of our 5-part Hour of Devastation full set review. Today we're wrapping things up with the green cards and the rest of the artifacts on basic lands and multicolored cards. So it's a smaller set. We got through this one a little bit quicker with 5 parts as opposed to 6. Hopefully give you more time to study the cards, think about your strategy going into this weekend's pre-release. Now tomorrow we're going to be back with a pre-release primer video as well, which is really directed at newer players who maybe never gone to a pre-release, but I'm also going to talk about the invocations in that video as well. That might be of some interest to some folks out there too. Now, quickly before we get started, if you check out the description below, you'll find a couple ways to help support us, one of which is our Amazon affiliate store. If you make any purchases there, a small percentage will come back to help support the channel. And also, you'll find our Patreon page linked down there too. Both are always appreciated. With that out of the way, let's get into the review. And if you watch the other videos in the series, you kind of know what to expect here. We're going to look at each card individually, talk about it first and foremost from a limited point of view, draft and sealed, and then anything that could maybe cross over into other formats like Commander, Standard, Modern, whatever. We'll discuss that a little bit as well. Now let's get going. We got a lot of cards, and green's actually a pretty exciting color. Green might be my favorite color in the set. So let's see what we have here. Starting off with Ambuscade, and this card actually is kind of awesome. Like, this is great green removal. Instant speed, cost 3, target creature you control gets +1/+0 to end a turn and deals damage equal to its power to another creature that an opponent controls. So, not a fight mechanic. You don't get the creature dealing its damage back to your creature. You just simply are doing the damage and +1 whatever your normal damage would be. So you can still attack with it and feel pretty confident. That's actually kind of awesome. Fantastic card. It's a common too, like hopefully an easy pickup in a draft when you need that green removal, because this is pretty much as premium as green removal is going to get nowadays. Beneath the Sands, well, here's a way to ramp out a little bit maybe, or perhaps fix your colors, and that's a real good thing to have, especially if you're going deep with some of these mythic spells. If you're lucky enough to open some of these mythic spells that are multiple colors that are really good, this could help you get there and make them more playable for you. And yeah, overall, cards like this are always decent to have from time to time. And it also can cycle if it doesn't matter at some point. And I like that a lot too, because I feel for 3 mana, searching my library for a basic land, I feel like that's still okay in modern day Magic, but having the cycling option really kind of pushes this card a little bit. Maybe even makes it standard playable if there's a deck looking to ramp. Bitterbow's Sharpshooters. Pretty good creature, actually. 5-drop, 4/4 with Vigilance and Reach, deals with flying, which sometimes green doesn't have good answers to. I'm on board for this. Again, it's a common, like you can pick it up maybe middle of the pack, and it's a nice 5-drop for green. I mean, not a lot to say about it other than its utility limited, but I'm pretty high on this card. Devotee of Strength. Now this one's a green and 2/3/2, so again, feels economical enough even without reading any further, but it's also a nice mana sink. A green and 4, and target creature gets +2/+2 till end of turn. Not just this one, but any creature. So you can give this ability to some of your big trample creatures or something like that. Again, it feels like it's a good card early, good card late. Something I'd be very happy to play again in Limited. Dune Diviner. This one, again, at least it's a 2/3 for 3. I'm not quite as high on this ability. I realize there is sort of a sub-game going on where you can gain little bits of life here and there. And if you put enough of those cards together, I'm sure that's good. But for the most part, I'm just looking at this as a 2/3 for 3, which maybe I need it, maybe I don't. It just depends on what my pool looks like. Feral Prowler. Well, the art's awesome. How's the card? The card's actually good too. It's a 1/3 for 2. So again, it's a nice blocker. It slows things down. Maybe if you're in like Simic colors especially. But when this dies, you also get to draw a card, so it replaces itself. I feel actually really good about this. Like another common card that I'm really happy to pick up. Frilled Sandwaller. Reminds me a little bit of Rootwaller. It's like a mini Rootwaller, I guess. It's a 1-drop. It's only a 1/1 this time. But for a green and 1, it gets +2/+2 till end of turn. You can only do this once each turn, so it can at times be a 3/3. But that's a good 1-drop. A lot of times I struggle finding good 1-drops that I want to play in my limited decks, whether it's sealed or draft. And this one I'd be really happy to play if I don't have other early turn plays, like making this a 3/3 and attacking in. Can actually be pretty good to get some early damage, especially in an aggressive build. Gift of Strength. It has a sort of giant growth feel to it. I mean, obviously it costs 1 more, but +3/+3 at instant speed for 2. I'm actually pretty okay with that. Plus, it gives it reach, so it is a way to deal with flyers in green. It almost becomes like removal for flyers in some circumstances. So that's pretty good for 2 mana. Again, another common that I'm super happy to pick up. This is why I like green a lot. It's the strength of the commons. Like, I feel like you can always get some good uncommons and rares in your colors, but then at the end of the pack, like, you're really kind of struggling to pick stuff up. These cards, if they come around at the end of a pack, I'll be real happy. Harrier Naga. Another fine card. This was a 3/3 for 3. Great. I mean, economical. Really economical, actually. Almost beyond curve. Like, this is another great common. Hope Tender. This is a fine 2-drop, 2/2 that has upside to it. Even if you don't use the upside, this is still very playable and limited because a lot of times you just need 2 drops, right? 2/2s for 2 are usually good. They're going to help bolster your curve and get your deck to where it needs to be. And if it has other things that maybe sometimes come into play, well, wonderful. And that's probably the perfect example of this card, because these other abilities might not always matter, but if they do, wonderful. It's just bonus. That first one, I get what they're trying to do here. You pay 1 and tap this, untap a land. So it's generally trying to utilize some of these utility lands a little better. And I don't know, sometimes that comes into play. Probably a lot of times it won't. The second ability, Exerting, does feel a little slow, but you're able to untap 2 lands. So it does lead to a little bit of a ramp, at least every other turn. It can also color fix at times if you're trying to play like a double color spell and you're stuck on mana. So yeah, there's some benefit to it for sure. Beyond that, I could see maybe having some fun with this in Commander because there are more utility lands that you could use and utilize and maybe tap twice. Things like, I don't know, Maze of Ith. There's actually a lot of stuff out there you can probably think of. But there's a lot more targets out there for something like this when you start expanding your base a little bit. I think it's a little too slow, honestly, for probably Standard or like Modern or anything like that. Hour of Promise. This one's interesting to me. First off, from a limited point of view, when you're at 5 mana, do you really need more lands? Sometimes the answer to that will be no. It just depends on your deck, right? Now, there are reasons, though, that this could be helpful. It is any land. It's not just basic lands. So it could grab you some deserts if you're in Desert Matters and you haven't been able to hit your deserts, or maybe you only were able to get like 1 or 2 deserts. That could be good in some circumstances. Or you could just be trying to color fix if you're trying to go greedy. Or, yeah, maybe you are playing some big stuff that you want to go larger and get some more lands. It also gives you a couple zombie tokens, which that's going to matter sometimes too, and maybe different decks. So it's doing a lot of different things. I mean, there's decks that won't need this, obviously, like maybe more aggro decks that are playing smaller things. But I do think there's raw power here. And I do wonder about different combos you can do in other formats with this card. Like, I mean, grabbing Thespian Stage and perhaps Dark Depths. That could be interesting. Or maybe grabbing cards for Valakut in Modern. I don't know. Like, I feel like there's things that you could do here. The only drawback is the 5 starts to feel a little expensive when you start dealing with some of these faster formats. But there's a lot of interesting interactions. I mean, look at Commander. You can probably think of a number of interesting utility lands that you just simply play there that you'll be able to search for that could have some high power level behind them. So, yeah, the card I think will have a place, if nowhere else, Commander. But I do think it is a card that could see some extensive play over the years in different formats at different times. Life Goes On. This is cheap life gain, and it's actually sizable life gain. Like, usually I kind of ignore these cards and think, well, I don't know, do I really want to put resources and take up a slot in my deck just to gain life? Because life buys you time, but it doesn't necessarily buy you games. And I rather have stuff that buys me games usually. But when you start talking about like 4-8 life for 1 mana, I start to take notice. And again, there's a lot of these little small life gain spells in this particular set that if you put a bunch of them together and you're doing other stuff too, I don't know, that could be interesting. It definitely hoses a aggro deck for sure. So here's my thought on the card. There are cards that interact with life gain. Not many, but there's a few. There's a really good rare we saw in white, or mythic rare, so you won't have that often, but if you do, this card becomes better. But even aside from that, like, I'm going to sideboard this in when I'm playing against aggro, basically, and I'll be happy with it there. Majestic Matriarch. This card's actually kind of awesome. It's a mythic. I talked about this a few days ago when it was originally revealed by Magic Mike's, and the card's just really cool. Like, it has that effect that we've seen before where it kind of copies keyword abilities, and that's cool, but the fact that its power and toughness are equal to twice the number of creatures you control, That's super sweet. Like, I love this thing. For 5 mana, super economical. It's doing a lot of stuff for you. Now, granted, if you top deck this and you're losing and you have, like, no creatures in play, that's kind of sad. But at the same time, like, if you can just establish even just a few creatures, this thing gains momentum very quickly. And I like it. First pickable, definitely in draft. Great card if you open and sealed. And I think this has some potential, again, for standard. Imagine playing this at the top end of, like, a Selesnya Humans deck or something. And you just have, like, maybe one little flyer, one little first strike card. Like, that's enough for this thing to start to become a force really quick. I like this a lot. This is Defeat. Here's the first one of these defeat cards that I'm not super high on. And the problem is they had to make it cost 3 because it destroys a forest. And they don't want land destruction to be too easy. So, yeah, here we are. And it's still okay. It's still sideboardable against green. It's just not as exciting as some of the other ones. But especially if your opponent is playing a green enchantment or planeswalker, then this card becomes a lot better. So, where does this actually see play? I'm not going to blindly board this in when I see green like the other 4 cards, right? Like when I saw their colors, I would board them in. This one, I'm going to board in if my opponent's getting greedy, and I feel like I can disrupt their mana base by getting rid of a forest. So if they're going 3 colors or something like that, then this card becomes a little bit better. Or if there's a green enchantment that I'm having problems dealing with, then I'm kind of thinking about it. Or maybe they open Samut or something like that. So other than that, in limited, it's got kind of a niche role, but it's just fine. I don't really see it necessarily playing a big role in standard. However, again, if there's any green enchantments or planeswalkers that start to do well in the meta going forward, then this does become a sideboard card. Oasis Ritual. This is a nice way to ramp, fix your mana. It's a little expensive though at 4. I mean, they're giving you a 4-drop mana dork basically, but they're giving you 2/4 body, so it does make it a nice blocker and such too. Now, you can tap it for any color, so it also provides fixing. That's kind of nice. And you can exert it for 2 of any color, which is pretty significant ramp. So again, it depends on what my deck's trying to do sometimes, but I'm okay playing a 2/4 for 4 just generally in limited games. So that combined with the fixing and ramp, yeah, I'm actually pretty happy to play this card. And it's a common, another really strong common in green. Overcome. Alright, this one's kind of like the open fire of green because this is your overrun with 1 less power toughness. But the question is overrun with 1 less power and toughness still good? I actually think it is. If you ever played with overrun in limited, the card back in the day was bonkers. I remember playing core sets, sealed and draft, picking that card up, and it basically just steals you games for 5 mana. Like, totally steals you games. This one, okay, it's watered down a little bit, but I still feel like it can steal you games. Especially if you have some big creatures in play. That trample is a huge deal. And then the buff at +2/+2. It's really not that different from +3/+3, considering I have overrun games quite a bit with the original overrun where I didn't need the +3/+3, like a +2/+2 would have done the trick. So yeah, this card is still really good for limited purposes, maybe even standard playable. Pride Sovereign. A Cat Matters card. It's always nice to see those, especially for commander players that are trying to bolster that archetype a little bit. Now it's a 2/2 for 3 on paper. I don't love that. However, it gives +1/+1 for other cats you control. So if you do have some other cats, this becomes very economical very quickly. And it can also create its own cats by paying a white and tapping and exerting. So it's not the fastest thing, but you do get to create 2 cats with lifelink when you do that, effectively making this a 4/4. So again, pretty good card, I think. This one's a rare. You won't see it as often, of course, but even in the absence of other cats to play with, still feels like a nice 3-drop to me. Quarry Beetle, good sized creature, a 4/5 for 5. I'm happy to play that. And it has the ability that maybe or maybe not will be relevant, but I can return a land from my graveyard to the battlefield. So maybe some of the deserts and the sacrificing desert effects could be used again. I find that kind of interesting. Or perhaps just if I'm in Simic and I'm discarding or milling myself or looting or whatever, then all of a sudden I can make use of some of these other cards, especially if I need to fix color or something. So yeah, it actually feels pretty decent to me. And remember, in a way, it also could be ramp with a little bit of setup because you return a target land. It doesn't count as your land drop for the turn. Rampaging Hippo. Here's a decent 6-drop, which is going to work real good with like that quasi-overrun card we just saw, right? 5/6 for 6 with trample, and you can cycle it away if you run into mana trouble. Great card. Another really good common. Ramanap Excavator. Alright, this is pretty crazy. This is a Crucible of Worlds on legs. I mean, 3 casting costs, 2/3 with a Crucible of Worlds ability. This is an awesome budget option for Crucible for Commander players. I mean, Crucible is expensive. It's, what, around $65 or so? That's kind of insane, and hopefully we'll get a reprint soon. But this card, in the meantime, it's got your back. It's got you covered. Maybe it's a little easier to get rid of than Crucible, but it still does the same thing. Still lets you bring back those wastelands or those strip mines or whatever else you want to bring back. Now, in Limited, that could be some of these deserts. And again, green and red play best with deserts, especially these desert utility cards where you're sacrificing deserts to get an effect. This helps you repeat those effects. Could be pretty interesting. It's rare, you won't see it all the time, but if you draft this early and then go into more deserts, could have something good there. I do think, at least in Standard right now, the cost of some of these deserts are going to not necessarily make that a viable strategy, but I do have to wonder about things like cycling lands. Like cycle away lands early and then later on you still get to play them. That's feels pretty good to me. Or even the same turn, you can cycle and play the land the same turn. So I find that actually pretty cool. Great interaction with the cycling lands. Ramanap Hydra. Another card that plays with deserts. This time it matters to have a desert both in play and in your graveyard. I think this might be the only card where it's not one or the other that matters. This is actually both that will help you, so I think that's pretty cool. Now, we saw a card in Battle for Zendikar, Woodland Wanderer, which I really had high hopes that that card would see more play in Standard at the time, which was a very similar card. Basically, you had to pay different color mana when you cast it, but if you did, it was a Vigilance Trample card that would get a buff. This is a different way to get to the same place, basically, but it also gives it reach, which maybe matters a little more. So, I don't know. I'd like to see it get Standard play, but considering Woodland Wanderer didn't really get there, I don't know if this will. But it's still a great card for limited purposes, if nothing else. Resilient Kenra. This is another interesting card for me. A nice 2/2 for 2. You know how I like those. And when it enters the battlefield, the creature gets +X/+X till end of turn where it's this creature's power. So at first it'll be a +2/+2, but Eternalize for 6, comes back as a 4/4, gives something +4/+4 till end of turn. Again, works really well with trample creatures. It's just a lot of utility. A 2-drop that's doing a lot of stuff. Ronis' Last Stand. Alright, this overall has been a great cycle. I wasn't big on the red card that we saw yesterday, but all the others I'm actually pretty excited about. This maybe is my favorite. I don't know, this or Bantu's in black. But anyway, 2 green, sorcery. You get a 5/4 green snake creature token. Okay, lands you control don't untap during their next untap step, but this only costs 2. Feels actually pretty economical. I mean, think of it this way. Would you pay 2 green Echo for a 5/4 creature token? Yeah, you probably wouldn't be pretty happy with it. Now, granted, if you play anything else or somehow your lands get tapped other than just this, then, of course, those lands don't untap too. Keep that in mind. But just generally, it feels super economical. Now, it's not all magical Christmas land out there with this card, though. There's some hazards you gotta be wary of. Things like Unsummon exist. Unsummon will make your good day turn bad real fast after you play this, for example. I mean, there's plenty of cards out there that do bounce things and bounce creatures that you do have to worry about that aren't very expensive that your opponent could be playing. Also, when you get into Standard, you have cards like Fatal Push, which I do want to point out because this came up when the card was premiered, that tokens count as 0 casting cost cards, since they don't have a casting cost, and that means, yes, they can be fatal pushed. So, you have all that working against you out there, so where does this card fall? Even with the hate out there, I'm still playing it. Like, yeah, there's times it's not going to pan out, and that's fine. I mean, that's going to be true. Every creature dies to removal, the old cliche, right? But this one dies to not just removal, but also bounce spells and utility spells, stuff like that. So that is problematic, but I'm also not investing all that much to do it. 2 green this turn, maybe 2 green the next turn. But overall, I think it's still economical enough to go for it and just try to get that damage across, because when it works, it's going to be really good for you. I think this is going to be, first pickable in draft easily. Great card in sealed as well. And I do think it will see Standard play. It could potentially even see play in Modern, even Legacy. It's just a very strong, cheap card. Ronis is Stalwart. This is another decent 2/2, another good common. Like, it's nothing like super earth-shaking or exciting, but a 2/2 for 2, and you can exert it to give it +1/+1 till end of turn, and it can't be blocked with creatures power 2 or less. So early on, it's almost like a free shot. Now, granted, you're exerting it, which means you can't block with it next turn, or even attack with it next turn. So you might be taking some crackback, but still, there's times where this is going to work to your benefit. And again, even if you don't use the exert, just having the 2/2 for 2 can be fine many times. Sidewinder Naga. This one is another Desert Matters card. This time, if you have a desert either in your graveyard or in play for yourself, then it gets +1/+0 and has trample. So you get a 4/2 trampler for 3. And I was a little critical a couple days ago of the 4/2s for 4. But if I can orchestrate a 4/2 with trample for 3, I'm on board. Sign me up, because that's actually going to do enough work for 3 mana. Now, granted, if I don't have the desert, is this still playable? I think it is. I mean, a 3/2 for 3 is still just fine. It's a little bit more on the aggro side than the defensive side, but it's still very playable. Another decent green common. Sifter Worm. This is awesome, actually. Great uncommon. 7/7 Trampler. Exactly what green's trying to do. You can ramp into this, perhaps. I mean, it costs 7. It's going to take you a tad bit of time to get there, of course, but it's definitely not impossible by any means. And also, when it enters the battlefield, you could gain some life. You get to scry 3. That can be super relevant. So, yeah, this is phenomenal. A nice finisher that you can pick up as an uncommon, maybe in a draft. I like this quite a bit. Great and sealed, too. A little too expensive, obviously, for what's doing in standard, but a great finisher, perhaps. Tenacious Hunter. Here's a -1/-1 matters card, and if a creature has a -1/-1 counter on it, so that is any creature on the board, not just your stuff, keep in mind, then this thing will get Vigilance and Death Touch, and that's actually pretty good. First off, a 4/4 for 4 on its own is pretty good. If you have Death Touch and Vigilance on top of it, this card's actually pretty bonkers. Again, another good card at uncommon this time, and if you are playing -1/-1 matters, and again, there's less of that in green this time around. It feels like that almost shifted a little bit to red in this set, but you are still playing with some of the Amonkhet cards too. Keep that in mind. This is actually pretty awesome, especially in Golgari colors, or maybe in the red-green decks, the Grow colors. But yeah, in general, still good, even if you're not messing around with the -1/-1 counters. Uncage the Menagerie. This one's a mythic. It's a little weird, though. Like, we've seen cards like this before, and we've actually seen much better versions of cards like this before, but the X kind of has a dual purpose, which makes this difficult. Like, you can search your library for X creature cards with different names, but they have to have converted mana cost of X. Like, if it was X or less, for example, then I would feel like, oh, okay, like, I could maybe restock my hand and get a lot of value out of this. The way it stands now, I have to really craft my deck a little better, or maybe just luck into a deck where this works. Like, for example, maybe I have 2 good 5-drops, or maybe I have 1 really good 5-drop and I just want to tutor for it. For 7 mana, I get to tutor for it now, so I get to grab that other 5-drop, which is maybe fine, right? So it goes to my hand, I still have to cast it. This is sorcery speed, I can't do it at the end of my opponent's turn. So, I mean, it's fine. It's still letting you tutor, and I think that's the way you have to think about this card. That's basically a tutor that might give you some extra cards, which may or may not be relevant for you at times. But card advantage is always good, and if you can tutor and grab a few cards out of the whole process, then you're coming out ahead, so it's still very, very good. I just want to point out some of the kind of oddness of the card. Also, the different names thing, of course, makes it more restricted for competitive formats like Standard. I'd still probably first pick this. I think it's still a really good card because it's a tutor and it's going to help me find the creature that I need to maybe close out a game sometimes. And it also could lead to card advantage. As far as Standard goes, I don't know if it's too restricted. Again, if a deck's really looking for a tutor, like a ramp deck could maybe get to this card faster and tutor for what they really want quicker, that becomes a little bit intriguing, but it is slow because, again, it's not an instant, and you're going to have to, of course, cast the card like on the next turn. I like where they're kind of going with it, but obviously we have seen better forms of this card in the past. All right, let's move on to the multicolor cards with River Hoopoe, and I actually like this a lot. I mean, it's a 2 cost 1/3 flyer. Granted, it's 2 on color, green and blue, but it also has a good mana sink of gain 2 life and draw a card. Again, the 2 life may be inconsequential a lot of the time, but drawing a card will never be inconsequential. Always one of the best things you can do. So again, you don't necessarily get that advantage till later, but in a slow-moving game where there's a board stall, this is going to feel really good. And it's a nice little blocker, especially in green, because sometimes you can't really deal efficiently with flyers, especially early flyers. And if you're in green-blue, this is a nice blocker sometimes, if nothing else. Appeal to Authority. This is a really good card. It's a sorcery, not an instant. I do want to point that out for the appeal portion here. But until end of turn, target creature gains trample. That might be good enough, but it also gets +X, where X is the number of creatures you control. So again, this gets better with the more creatures you have. If you're maybe going aggro, going wide, tokens, whatever the strategy may be, really cheap way to get maybe a large amount of damage across. That's actually kind of cool. Now the Authority side is relevant too because it's real cheap. You can actually cast both sides for a green, a white, and 1. And if that's the case, tap up to 2 target creatures your opponent controls, and your creatures get vigilance till end of turn. So now you don't have to worry about crackback, and you're able to get even more damage across. All for 3 mana. This feels really, really good. Probably first pickable in a lot of packs. And I'm really happy to run this. Even if I'm not going wide, like, it's still good. Giving something big trample and maybe like +2/+2 would still be good, right? Like, there's a lot you could be doing with this card, and it's very, very cheap. I think this will definitely see standard play. Again, imagine like a Selesnya Humans deck or something like that. This card would be perfect in a build like that, or probably many others that you could think of. It's another card that works well, dare I say it, with Infect. I don't know, again, if Infect can kind of re-coalesce itself in the world of Modern. It has been down a little bit, but maybe cards like this could help it. Driven to Despair, another really good green card. The Driven side, giving all your creatures, this time trample with no buff, but Curiosity built on, so maybe you can draw some cards. The Despair side, giving your stuff Menace and maybe creating a situation where your opponent has to discard cards. I actually find this very intriguing. Again, it's super economical. You can cast both sides if you want to for a green, a black, and 2, and maybe even put away a game, or at the very least draw into some answers. Another very strong card. Again, maybe first pickable in a lot of packs, and another card that could cross over into standard play. I really think so in the right deck. Traveler's Amulet. This is a reprint. It was originally from Innistrad. I got a reprint in Theros. And it was a good card in Limited there. It's going to be a real good card in Limited here. Maybe in some ways better in this environment. But it only costs 1, and then 1 to activate it. You do sacrifice it, but you get to search for a basic land and put it into your hand. So it is a way to fix your colors, make sure you don't miss land drops, just kind of accelerate things out just a tad bit. Even though it slows you down in the short term, hopefully in the long term it will keep your deck moving. So again, if you're trying to get a little bit greedy, go into a third color, or again, maybe you're trying to splash for something like a god or something really good you open, this will be a good card for you. Wall of Forgotten Pharaohs. This one is, well, first off, it's a wall, but it only costs 2, so, like, yes, it's not going to be able to attack, obviously, but 0/4 for 2 actually feels pretty good in a lot of decks where I'm trying to slow the game down, or if I need to sideboard this in against aggressive smaller creatures early on, this will be a good pick for me. Now, it also has another ability on top of it that plays with deserts. If you tap it, it will deal 1 damage to target player, but this only works if you either control a desert or have it in your graveyard. So, again, we're back to this whole death by 1,000 cuts strategy, which does appear to be a thing, and again, I don't know how easy that is going to be to put together in a draft, but I kind of want to try it out. Alright, let's move on to the non-basic lands with Desert of the Indomitable. Now, this, of course, is the last part of this cycle, and I've talked about it in the other videos, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but simply if you need a desert, and again, green might be one of the more relevant colors where you do need a desert, this is a way to still not lose that color requirement. Now, it slows you down a little bit coming into play tapped, but it does tap for green, and you can cycle it if you need to. And when you cycle, guess what? It goes to your graveyard. A lot of these cards are looking for deserts in your graveyard as well as or in play. Heshep Oasis. This is the last part of this particular cycle. It's another desert. This one doesn't slow you down. It doesn't come into play tapped. You can tap it for colorless mana or pay a life and get green. I like the ability on this one, though. I really like the black one in this cycle, and maybe this is second favorite or real close to first, actually. 2 green and 1. Sacrifice a desert and tap. Doesn't have to be this desert. Target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. Activate this only anytime you can cast a sorcery. So that means you can tack +3/+3 onto maybe some trampled creatures, or use this in conjunction with some combat tricks to get more damage across. Seems like it's exactly what green wants to be doing in this set. Alright, last card, Survivor's Encampment. And this is another desert, so another option there. And it's also here for color fixing. I mean, basically, if you happen to have a creature in play, you can tap that in this to get a mana of any color, which is nice. Now, it's awkward if you don't have a creature for some reason, but it still can tap for colorless mana, which is good too. I don't see this crossing over into standard because you have other things like Ether Hub or the dual lands and stuff like that, of course. But it's going to be good for you in limited if you're trying to go 3 colors, or who knows, maybe even 4 colors. Alright, having said that, those are the cards for today, and we did it! We got through the set! So thank you to everyone who has watched this series. I hope this helps you, at least in some way, for the pre-release coming up. Here's the thing with these cards. I mean, these are just my opinions, and people have different play styles and different ways of looking at things. So you're not always going to agree with me, and I'm definitely not always going to agree with other folks that analyze these cards, but that's okay. That's what Magic's all about. Play what you like. Play what's fun. Play what's intuitive for you. You're probably going to have better results that way than forcing a card that I say is good, but you really aren't comfortable playing, right? So think about that, and really, I'm not a pro or anything, obviously, but these are my thoughts from someone who's played Magic for a very, very long time and has played in a lot of limited environments. And hopefully you can take something away from that, even if it's just, maybe you disagree with things and you have your own opinions. But if I can help you get to those opinions, that's really what this video series is all about. So I hope it helps, and we're going to be back tomorrow with our pre-release primer, which is really geared for newer players. But we're also going to talk about invocations in that video as well. And then we have a whole bunch of stuff coming up later in the week. A lot of market stuff. So stay tuned for that. So until next time, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.